Podcast, episode 104. Game Advocates. Contenders. Pew, pew, pew.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Cannon Puncture Show. This is Rich Rogers here, bringing you another one of our Game Advocates episodes. On the line, across the pond in Dublin, I have with me Joe Murphy, who's an editor for the Collective Endeavor, and he's got a pretty cool blog with some free games called Palimpsest at palimpsestwordpress.com. How you doing, Joe?
I'm very good. Very good morning to you.
Good. So, what is this game you want to advocate for today?
Contenders is this strange, small, 3,000 word game that came out about 4 years ago now. And it's one of the really rare, obviously rare sports games that's come out. I hadn't really thought of it as a sports game because what happens at the table doesn't feel like watching a game of football, by which I mean soccer. But it's about sports. It's about boxing.
Boxing. Wow. Well, other than it being about boxing, what makes this kind of game different?
Well, Contenders is not about boxing. Contenders is a game for characters for whom boxing is an escape. It's an escape from the humdrum, it's an escape from the ordinary, it's an escape from the daily grind.
Interesting. Can you tease that out a little bit? How is it about that?
Sure. Well, the premise of the game is that the characters are people who are in one way or another down on their luck with debts and responsibilities and difficulties. And during the course of play, you play out the stories of how they edge closer towards fame and edge closer towards an escape. How they make good on the promises to their family or their friends. And also the competitiveness between the different characters at the table, between the different PCs. Though there's no requirement for it, very, very quickly you find the characters want to battle each other, apocalyptically.
You said the players at the table. What about the GM? What's the GM do?
Unfortunately, Contenders, the writer Joe Prince, he forgot to put a GM in. So it's an entirely GM-less game.
Okay.
Which throws a lot of people to begin with. A lot of people get confused about responsibilities and so on. But I mean, one of the reasons I really like Contenders is because it's a game where everybody has equal responsibility, where the setup time is minimal, and where everybody can bring their best game to the table because there aren't a whole lot of rules to pull you back, and there's nobody monitoring the spotlight time or making sure that everybody gets included. You advocate for yourself and you push the story that you want to push, and then collaborate with everybody else.
Okay, so you're talking about this boxing game, and it's about trying to reach fame. But hey, boxing. Why wouldn't I want to play like a cool fighting game so I can really dig in? Like, why wouldn't I play Feng Shui?
So it has boxing in it. Now, I should say I have no interest in boxing, and almost nobody I've ever run this game for has ever had an interest in boxing because gaming's pretty niche, but boxing is quite niche, and there isn't much overlap between the two. There aren't any sports games out there. There aren't any other games that have an emphasis on some sport or some game like that. There's a couple of games that touch on things like football and martial arts and a couple of other things like that. But Contenders brings different things to the table than just fighting. One of the strong themes in Contenders is will you earn the reward that your family or friends deserve? Will you not only get out of the gutter, but bring them along with you? Can you balance the responsibilities of these occasional fights and making sure your little old aunt gets fed every day, or that your sister gets college education, or that your mother is proud of you? And there's a huge dynamic. I mean, the mechanics deal hugely with the connection between your life inside and outside the ring. So it's not that while fighting is a really strong, important part of the game, that's not at all the focus in the mechanics. And actually, that tends to take up about 10 minutes of play for every session. But when it comes, those 10 minutes are really vital.
What are the players actually doing with each other in most Contenders games?
Well, when you pick a scene, you're often going to want an NPC to narrate. So all you've got at the beginning of a scene is I really want a work scene, and I want my character to be down at the docks, and he's asked to stay for overtime. So I want the foreman to come in and play that guy. And here's how I have an idea of how the foreman's going to be. You pick somebody else around the table to role play off you, and you talk. You just talk in character. There's a nice evolution of play that tends to happen in Contenders where people just get into sync with each other. The mechanics are pretty simple and they're important, but they're laid back. Where you go to the mechanics is a technique you can use. Like I said, so there's no pressure, there's no hassle, there's no hurry. And you typically roleplay off other characters. You roleplay off that foreman and his demands. You roleplay off the sister who needs a college fund and how she's not sure about college. And you build up this crew of NPCs that everybody starts caring about. When you're playing your character, when you're playing through your own work scenes, your own connection scenes, you're playing for what your character cares about. And then when other players are playing their scenes, you play their NPCs. And you can do a couple more things. You can start adding color detail. Here's the world we're in. In a previous game we had set in New Jersey, we had a strong sense of the soundtrack. So often people would mention, and this is the song that's playing right now. This is Blondie, this is Talking Heads, and here's how it affects the scene. So that was one way. That's not in the book. This was one way for us to talk about the tone of the scene and where we wanted it to drive. And the game does play a lot like a soap opera with these increasingly twisted relationships between the characters and their connections and the difficult things their connections want. As a lovely example, we had a convention game. This was a player who had never played anything before. She'd watched one game of Cold City, and she was a little nervous that she couldn't do this sort of thing. So she sat down and was playing a father. This was the world we picked was the inner city in Dublin in the 1950s. Nobody had any money. It was repressed, and religion was really important. They were some of the themes we picked up on.
Okay.
And she was playing a father, and the connection she chose at the beginning was her daughter, who had some interest in college. But we didn't say anything more than that. And she really wanted the daughter to go to college. And in the very first scene, she started playing the father, and one of the other players at the table started playing the daughter. And the daughter, it turned out, wanted to be a housewife. And there was an intake of breath around the table. We didn't expect two female players to go for that, because it felt like taking a step back, and that's why it was so entertaining. Mm-hmm. And within 5 minutes of playing, suddenly she'd opened up and saw, that's great. I can play to the heart of this father and his awful dilemma that his daughter wants to marry some schmuck from around the corner and doesn't want to go to college and doesn't want to improve herself and doesn't want to better herself with the money I can provide. We had a more recent game at a convention where we had a girl who had never played before and was really nervous about how to do this sort of thing. And within 5 minutes, she'd opened up, and she ended up being part of the climactic fight scene. She really opened up. She was vicious and brutal. She was terrifying. Perfectly terrifying. And really just got into the heart of it and really wanted to beat the crap out of the other guy.
Do you have any other favorite moments at the table?
There's some nice openness to how the rules can work. I laugh a lot. Let me read you something, because this just cracks me up every time I read it for being so simple and naive. Page 19 explains how to narrate your character, how to play your character. And having read 300-page rulebooks that devote 60 pages to playing your guy, all the book says is some players prefer to play their scenes like telling a story, narrating their contender in the third person. And some people do. Other people prefer to describe things in the first person. Some players prefer to play it like an actor. That's it. That's the entirety of role-playing history, just summed up in 3 lines. You can do anything you like. Cracks me up every time I read it. It's just so brief and zen. So some of the fun in the game comes from taking these very simple elements and pushing them hard. So we've had twice now, we've had lovely examples of connections where the connection is somebody physically distant from the character and you're writing letters to them. When the other player is NPCing, there's an assumption there that it takes weeks for these letters to be sent to and fro. We had a lovely example in the World War II setting. This ran for, I think, a couple of weeks. The letter writing was a sort of Dear John, sweetheart, and it was increasingly clear that she was hooking up with some other guy back home.
Oof.
Awful, and very funny and tragic in equal measure. We had another more recent letter writing with a guy wanting to get out of the town he was in to go to Broadway to sell his screenplays because that's what he really cared about. And the boxing was a diversion for the character at best. You know, it was something he was good at but didn't really care about. So people take these really simple elements. What's a work scene? Well, a work scene is somewhere where you try to earn money, and it might be illegal. Okay, what kind of stuff is illegal? Does drug dealing cover it? Does my character becoming a bouncer feel appropriate? Is he actually important? Is he a member of the mafia? Is he setting up a little crime syndicate of his own? So people take these very simple elements. Crime is involved, and run with them.
What do you see other players loving about the game when you're playing with them?
I think there's a nice to and fro in the energy at the table. It's kind of hard to see until you play it, but there's a fascinating correlation between the kind of things you want your character to get and where the system keeps throwing you. It's unexpected. There are things happening at the table that you just don't expect, and don't realize matter, and then suddenly you realize you're, like as an example of play, we had a character whose sister, he was trying to encourage her to trust him. Pretty simple. And they ended up going to, this was the 1980s New Jersey game, they ended up going to an early Beastie Boys gig back when they were punk. They went to the cards, and the cards went badly, and the sister got lost, and she got locked outside the club for the next 3 hours and sat there being scared for 3 hours. And it just felt so right at the table. And so the guy inside is chatting up a girl, and he doesn't realize the sister's gone, and that obviously more or less destroyed their relationship for the rest of the game. There are little things happen at the table. One of the nice mechanics is when jokers appear. So you're comparing cards as usual, and jokers appear. Joker indicates that you need to include something from the previous scene. Now, usually in the game, you're playing your character and the NPCs around them, and you might not interact with the other PCs too much. You don't necessarily all come together in the bar and chat. You don't all necessarily come together in fights. But if there's a Joker included, you need to include some little element. And that might be an element of setting, that might be a character. And racking your brain to see how the previous scene fed into the current scene is really exciting. It's a difficult constraint. It might be something you do already in your games, but to force you to do it really makes you hunt, really makes you push for it. So that can throw in things like character trying to, again, this is one of the sort of soapy scenes, trying to convince his wife he's not going to be boxing anymore. And this is just feeding her money. And we all know he has a boxing scene up next. So it's bittersweet. And so gives her a ring and says, yeah, I got this ring. Isn't it amazing? That's actually why maybe I should be boxing, because it does pay the bills. And she's kind of slowly being persuaded by this, and maybe it'll work out. Next scene, we head across, and my character had to include some element from that. So we decided that he'd stolen the ring and had pawned it for his own ill-gotten gains. And then we realized, oh, she has a stolen ring. That's not nice. And it just adds a little extra darkness to it.
Wow. Let's flip this and talk a little bit about why is it that people hate contenders?
I played it recently with a friend who said 5 minutes before the game started, this won't work. This just won't work. And 5 minutes in, I was like, okay, this might work. And then by the end was, this is great, this is really good, this is really entertaining. And the inevitable problem, nobody's interested in boxing. And I always, when I'm running this at conventions, I remind people, I don't care about boxing either. You don't have to worry about it. That's not the focus of play, and you're not supposed to be playing this because you necessarily like the sport. The boxing match that happens in the game is a release of tension. It's exciting, really exciting, and very tense, and important and memorable. But that's not the focus of play. So you can kind of hook people through the soap opera elements. You're playing through these dark lives, these people who want to get out of the gutter. How do you do that? I think some people, there's a couple of little mechanical quibbles that some people have if they played it a few times, but that gets ironed out pretty quickly. I don't think people really get hung up on it. And generally, I mean, it's a short game. People don't think you can get effective play out of such minimal rules. But I just look at it as pared back. There's some flavor text that you could trim out, and you could read the whole book in an hour comfortably. It takes 15 minutes to explain, and all of the rules are on the character sheet. But but most people assume that there's more to it than that. There's a couple of tactics you can play, but there isn't really more to it than that. The excitement of the play is at the table, not in reading the rulebook.
Is there anything else? Anything we didn't cover?
Well, fight scenes. Fight scenes. So you play through all your soap scenes, and that's all exciting, I guess. But you really got to beat up that other guy. You can have. I've seen a couple of games where we've had NPC boxers develop during play, and they're fine. But really, looking at that guy across the table and wanting to beat up him, that's where the excitement is. The way fight scenes work is you've got these in-ring traits, as I said earlier, which are roughly sort of your defensive and offensive traits, and the stamina of your character. And having had a promotion scene and worked out the potential kitty, you then have a fight scene. So you describe this is happening on the island with palm trees and chicken coops we know we're going to smash open. This is happening in the boiler room of the aircraft carrier, or this is a back alley with people throwing money at this wise guy. Roughly, this gets kind of tactical and exciting, but roughly the way it works is you've got tactics cards. It's a playing card. There are 4 of them, hearts, diamonds, spades, and clubs, that correspond to I'm going to be emphasizing attack, I'm going to be emphasizing defense, I'm going to be balanced, or I'm going to fight dirty. And fighting dirty gives you a very high offense and a very high defense. And so it's enticing, very enticing. So you compare your offense and the opposition's defense cards, and you play through a series of rounds comparing those kind of hands. And every round, based on your fighter's stamina, you start losing traits. So your character starts off, and at the beginning of the fight scene, they're really good at attacking, and they get whittled down and whittled down and whittled down until they're really just running on blood and sweat and tears. They've got nothing left, and it's all about the tactics. That's when it gets kind of exciting. And you usually play through sort of 3, maybe 5 rounds of combat with declaring these tactics cards, looking each other in the eye. I really encourage the players to really look at each other and smirk, trash talk if you like, and then play I'm going to go dirty fighting when the other guy's going defensive and everybody swears at the table. You can have a couple of little you can have the uninvolved players bet on how the match is going to turn out.
Oh.
Tremendously good fun, and then people start cheering and hooting and hollering. And you play through your 3 or 4 rounds with the characters getting whittled down, falling to their knees. The narration changes all of a sudden because people are including all the narration of, and he's got blood in his eye, or his lip is cut, or he's fallen to one knee. And you go backwards and forwards on that, and at the end, one fighter is declared a victor and wins the kitty, and the other guy gets a small amount of money, and then both characters' reputation increases, and reputation is important because the higher reputation, the more kitty you stand to earn. So there's lots of reasons to get involved in a fight, apart from that guy on the other side of the table really deserves it. And then your reputation increases, you got a bit more cash, and you funnel that back into your training, and then you're looking around the table to see who's the next guy who needs a beating. This is one of the rare games that has an end game. Everybody knows what they're aiming for, and when one contender's reputation hits 10, so that's after quite a lot of fights, but when one reputation hits 10, you enter endgame, and that's a mother of all battles where usually the fighters pair off against each other and fight one last fight. At the end of that, having fought viciously, you then look at your character sheet and compare the pain and hope on your character sheet. Pain tends to increase during the game when work scenes go badly. When work scenes go badly, you pick up a point of pain, and that makes work scenes in the future easier. And you think it's a good thing, but it's not a good thing, because at the end of the game, if your pain is higher than your hope, ultimately your character's life goes badly. You've won that final match, hooray! But we know your character's going to die alone, and you narrate in a little epilogue of here's what happens next, or here's what happens to my connections. Does the sister go to college? Does the father respect me? Does my wife accept what I do, or not? And you narrate that epilogue. And that can be a real, I don't want to draw in too many boxing puns, but that can be a real gut punch. Particularly, one of the reasons to accrue pain is in fight scenes. You can bring the pain and increase your character's pain and get some bonus cards from it. And it always seems like a good idea at the time. But it's not a good idea at the time, because you're exchanging your character's long-term happiness for this short-term gain. Your character can, in fight scenes, burn hope. If connection scenes have gone well during the previous game and you've increased the character's hope, through them. You're inspired or you're encouraged by the way the scene went. Your character's hope starts increasing, and that's really good. When you spend hope in a fight, your character recovers a little energy and can fight on a little further. And it seems like a good idea at the time, but then when it comes to the end game, your pain wins out, and that's an unhappy ending for you. So there's all of these short-term tactical gains, and they seem really good. This works well in convention games as well, where in the space of like an hour or two, you can play a character who fights and fights hard, and then at the end, you're looking at a really sad ending, and that leaves you with a nice taste in your mouth.
That's really interesting. I've learned a lot about Contenders.
It's a tricky little game to get into because it's so simple, but it's one of the most rewarding games I've experienced over the last 5 or 6 years. I've run it at like a dozen conventions. I've played longer term games of it, and I don't know that there's a better game for people who are entirely new to gaming. It gives you really simple tools, takes the pressure off everybody. You can play hard, you can play competitively, but it's not that difficult. That's one of the reasons I keep going back to Contenders is it's not that difficult. 5 minutes to set up, 10 minutes to set up the characters, and you're into play, and an hour later you've got 5, 6 great scenes behind you that have really mattered, that everybody cares about, where everybody's swearing and hissing or sighing and complaining. And the game pushes you in directions you weren't expecting.
Well, Joe, thanks a lot for coming on Game Advocates and talking about Contenders. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
We had such potential, such promise.